The human ship dropped out of superluminal transit like a piece of debris the cosmos had forgotten to destroy. Fleet Master Vorin stood at the heart of the Cathari 12th Defensive Array's command sphere. 4 eyes narrowed as the tactical hologram painted a single, ugly shape against the starfield. The UNN Vindicator was blunt, scorched, and asymmetrical in ways that offended every aesthetic principle the Ascendancy had refined across 2,000 years of spacefaring. Its hull plating looked patchworked, its engine signature wavered with irregularities, and the sensor profile screamed of improvised repairs. The ship broadcast no formal hailing codes, only a raw data pulse tagged with a human diplomatic key that was 6 months out of date. "One ship," Subcommander Jekyll said, his voice tight with disbelief. "High Conclave promised reinforcements and they sent 1 ship." Vorin said nothing. On the main display, the Solari swarm pressed against their outer picket lines in numbers that made mathematics feel like panic. The Ascendancy had held this sector for 43 cycles, bleeding noble formations into a tide of organic hulls and hive-adapted weaponry. They had begged the newly contacted Terrans for aid, expecting a flotilla, perhaps a rapid response group. Not this. Not a single vessel that looked like it had crawled out of a salvage yard. The human ship's engines flared and it began a thrust vector that made Jekyll's secondary heart skip a beat. The acceleration curve was insane, well beyond the inertial dampening safety limits any civilized species maintained. "Kill themselves at that burn," Jekyll said. The hail came through before anyone could answer. A voice flat as hammered steel, female, with a cadence that stripped every syllable of warmth. "Fleet Master Vorin, this is Captain Tessa Halyard, United Nations Navy. We have your strategic data. Designate the heaviest concentration of enemy tonnage. We will begin our engagement immediately." Greeting. No ceremonial recognition. No acknowledgement of the 43 cycles of sacrifice. Vorin's throat sack tight. "Captain Halyard, your single vessel cannot punch through the swarm's forward screens. We will coordinate a combined formation, synchronize shield harmonics, and negative." The word cut through the channel. "Coordinates. Now." Jekyll's crest flushed indigo, the color of indignation. "Fleet Master, this is absurd. If they die in the first pass, the Conclave will blame us." Vorin had survived too many battles to mistake bluntness for arrogance. There was something in the human's tone, not bravado, but exhaustion, the kind you heard in veterans who had already calculated their own deaths and moved past them. He forwarded the coordinates of the thickest Silari cluster, a writhing knot of hive carriers and spore frigates pressing toward the moon of Kelhadros. "Confirmed," Halyard said. "Maintain distance. Do not intervene." Vindicator's engine signature shifted. A burst of radiation sleeted across the Ascendancy fleet's sensors, not targeted but undirected, pure electromagnetic noise screaming across every band. Alarms howled before the filters auto-adjusted. For 6 seconds, the entire 12th array was sensor-blind. When the displays cleared, the human battleship was no longer on approach. It was already inside the swarm's outer envelope, pushing through a cloud of bioplasma as if wading into a storm. Vorin watched the feed and felt something he had no word for. The human ship did not fly a clean parabolic curve or a graceful intercept spiral. It jinked, rolled, and skidded through space with the chaotic unpredictability of a wounded animal that refused to die. Every Ascendancy tactical doctrine said those maneuvers wasted energy and stressed structural frames. Yet the swarm's predictive targeting, always the deadliest aspect of the hive mind, kept missing. The Vindicator began to shoot. Missiles burst from launch tubes in clusters, not in synchronized salvo patterns, but in a ragged, rolling volley that spread warheads across multiple vectors. Each one carried a chemical explosive tip that detonated with a dirty orange flash. No elegant energy lances, no shield-penetrating frequencies, just fire and shrapnel and raw kinetic transfer. A hive carrier's flank split open, spilling atmosphere and liquefied organics. The human battleship rammed the wreckage and kept going. Jekyll's crest had gone pale. "They use solid projectiles," he whispered, "like a pre-space civilization." The bridge of the Vindicator, Commander Tessa Halyard, didn't waste breath on commentary. A year ago, she had buried her daughter on a colony world overrun by an insectoid infestation. She had spent every day since then preparing exactly one mission profile. Her crew, those who had volunteered, knowing the odds, moved through the combat stations with the grim silence of people who had already said their goodbyes. The Silari mindweb lashed out in confusion, trying to process an enemy who did not fit any tactical template. Halyard opened a channel that flooded the swarm's intership communications with human audio, a distorted recording of a child's nursery rhyme, layered over bursts of manic laughter and the sound of something sharp scraping metal. It was not a weapon. It was a question the hive could not answer. The swarm's forward elements began to stutter, coordination fraying at the edges. Aboard the Ascendancy command sphere, Vorin watched the impossible unfold. His fleet had spent cycles bleeding for every kilometer. This single ship, this crude hammer of a vessel, had already done more damage in 90 seconds than his entire array had managed in the last 10 days. He should have felt hope. Instead, he felt the cold prickle of something far more unsettling. What kind of species built a ship like that? The Vindicator took a direct bioplasma hit amidships. Hull plating buckled. Atmosphere vented from a dozen compartments. Any sane commander would have pulled back sealed bulkheads and retreated to the safety of the Allied line. Halyard did not retreat. Engineering override safeties on Reactor 4. Flood sections 12 through 18. The confirmation came without hesitation. Reactor radiation poured into the breached decks, cooking the swarm boarding organisms that had latched onto the hull. The Vindicator glowed briefly with the sickly blue of leaking hard radiation, and then it accelerated again, driving deeper into the heart of the cluster. Vorin's tactical officer reported that the human ship's life sign readings had dropped by 12%. 12 of their crew dead in an instant, deliberately sacrificed to clear the decks. "Captain Halyard," Vorin transmitted, "you must disengage. Your vessel cannot sustain. Maintain distance, Fleet Master. We're not finished." Vindicator's forward batteries spoke again, and another swarm cruiser came apart. The human battleship was no longer a ship. It was a blade being driven into the enemy's gut, and whoever held the hilt had no intention of pulling it out. The swarm responded the only way it knew how, by throwing biomass at the problem. A dozen spore frigates converged on the Vindicator, spewing boarding pods that latched onto the ship's scarred hull like parasites seeking a wound. Organic tendrils bored through plating. Enzymatic acids dissolved bulkhead seals. Inside the human ship, automated defenses kicked in, incendiary charges, razor wire launchers, compartments flooded with superheated steam. The sounds filtering through the hull-mounted microphones were picked up by Ascendancy listening posts. Screams, inhuman chittering, and underneath it all, the steady, methodical rhythm of human crew fighting in zero gravity with magnetic boots and short-range shotguns. Vorin found he could not look away. Subcommander Jekyll had abandoned all pretense of professional detachment. His 4 hands gripped the console as if trying to steady reality itself. They're not even sealing the breach sections. They're venting atmosphere to space and fighting in vacuum while the swarm suffocates. That's not a defense strategy, that's brutality against their own environment. It's denial of resources, Vorin said quietly. They're making the ship a trap, every corridor a kill box, every compartment a sacrifice. Vindicator rotated on its central axis and fired a full broadside of kinetic cannons. The rounds were dumb metal slugs accelerated to fractions of light speed, no guidance, no energy matrix. They simply tore through whatever was in front of them. A spore frigate folded in half. Another detonated from internal pressure loss. The human battleship's hull now resembled a piece of driftwood floating through a sea of organic debris. Captain Halyard's voice cut through the fleet channel again, and this time something had shifted beneath the flatness, not emotion but intent. "Fleet Master, we're reading a concentration of hive mind signal traffic originating from the carrier at coordinates Delta 7. Confirm." Vorin checked his own displays. The carrier she indicated was a nexus organism, a relay node that amplified the swarm's collective consciousness across the entire sector. It had been their primary target for cycles, but it was guarded by overlapping defensive fields and 6 cruiser-class bioforms. No ascendancy strike had ever gotten close. Confirmed, Vorin said. But you won't reach it. The defensive screen is too dense. Watch. The Vindicator's reactor output spiked to levels that should have triggered a core meltdown. The human ship's engines flared white-hot, and it executed a turn that bent its own structural frame, a maneuver that sent shockwaves rippling along the hull, snapping external sensor booms and shearing away one of the secondary point defense turrets. Structural integrity warnings screamed across the Ascendancy monitoring stations, but the human ship didn't slow down. It punched through the defensive screen like a fist through wet paper. The swarm cruisers tried to close, but the Vindicator was no longer engaging them. It was flying straight at the Nexus carrier, and Halyard had just proven that human engineering did not care about safe operational limits. Every ship in the Ascendancy fleet was designed with redundancies, buffers, margins of error. The Vindicator had been designed by people who considered safety margins a suggestion, not a rule. The human ship slammed into the Nexus carrier's forward envelope and began firing at point-blank range. Nuclear-tipped torpedoes launched from tubes that were practically pressed against the enemy hull. The detonations were blinding, white spheres of expanding plasma that consumed everything they touched. The Nexus carrier's psychic scream rippled through subspace. Across the entire battlefront, swarm organisms faltered. Some stopped moving. Some turned on each other. And in the center of the fireball, the Vindicator was burning. Halyard's voice came through again, quieter now, almost conversational. Fleet Master, the Nexus is neutralized. Swarm coordination will degrade over the next 7 minutes. You have a window. Vorin's fleet surged forward without waiting for his command. The crews had been holding for so long, watching their comrades die, watching the line shrink kilometer by kilometer. Now the enemy was staggering, and the Ascendancy moved with the precise, elegant violence they had spent millennia perfecting. Energy lances carved through drifting bioships. Interlocking shield formations advanced in perfect geometric harmony, mopping up disoriented swarm elements before they could regroup. It was beautiful. It was everything Cathari war doctrine said combat should be. And it was only possible because one battered human ship had thrown itself into the grinder and broken the teeth. When the final swarm ship in the sector went dark, Vorin turned his attention back to the Vindicator. The human battleship was adrift. Its reactor signature had dropped to minimal levels. Atmosphere was leaking from multiple hull breaches. Of the original life signs that had been present at the start of the engagement, less than half remained. "Hail them," Vorin said. The communications officer attempted contact. No response. Attempted again. Nothing. Jekyll's crest flattened. Fleet Master, the swarm broadcast a final psychic pulse before the Nexus died. It was encoded. We think it was a homing signal sent deep into their territory. Vorin felt cold. A call for reinforcements. Worse. The energy signature suggests they've awakened something larger. The view screen, the Vindicator's running lights flickered once, twice, and then went dark. And somewhere beyond the edge of the system, an enormous presence began to move. The Vindicator drifted in silence for 11 minutes. Aboard the Ascendancy command sphere, Fleet Master Vorin authorized rescue shuttles to stand by, but his tactical instincts, honed across hundreds of engagements, screamed that something was wrong. The human ship's reactor had not gone critical. Its power systems had not failed. The shutdown was too clean, too deliberate. A wounded vessel did not lose all systems simultaneously unless someone had intentionally pulled the plug. Then the stealth pod lit up. It was a tiny thing, barely visible even to military-grade sensors, ejected from the Vindicator's underside during the chaos of the nuclear detonations. The pod had drifted with the debris field, indistinguishable from the chunks of burned hull plating and frozen organic matter that now surrounded the battle site. But the moment the swarm's psychic pulse faded, the pod activated a tight-beam targeting laser and painted the distant shape of a swarm supercarrier that had just emerged from the system's outer cloud. The beam carried no weapon. It was a guide. Vorin's tactical officer shouted a warning, but it was already too late. The Vindicator's main reactor, which, they now realized, had been ejected from the ship during the brief power down, ignited 3 kilometers off the supercarrier's port bow. The reactor's containment field collapsed in a controlled cascade, channeling every last erg of energy into a single, focused blast that speared through the supercarrier's hangar bay and detonated its internal munition stores. The resulting explosion was visible from the Ascendancy fleet's position, without magnification. The supercarrier, a beast that could have consumed half the sector, split into 3 pieces and went dark. On the Vindicator's command deck, what was left of it, Captain Tessa Halyard opened her eyes. The compartment was filled with smoke. The emergency lights cast long shadows across the bodies of her fallen crew. Her left arm was broken in 2 places, and she could feel blood pooling inside her suit from a wound she didn't have time to examine. She activated her suit's comm unit. Pod Alpha status. Still here, Captain. Lieutenant Myra Okonkwo's voice crackled through the static. Target destroyed. We're drifting dark, awaiting pickup. Good, stand by. Halyard pushed herself upright and surveyed the bridge. The tactical station was a slagged ruin. The navigation console flickered intermittently, but the secondary comms board was intact, and that was all she needed. She keyed the Ascendancy fleet frequency. Fleetmaster Voren. Request immediate medical and personnel extraction for surviving crew. Our ship is no longer combat capable. Ascendancy response took 8 seconds, an eternity for a species that prided itself on instant decision-making. When Voren's voice returned, it carried a weight Halyard recognized. It was the tone of someone who had just witnessed something they could not reconcile with their understanding of reality. Captain Halyard, you ejected your own reactor as a weapon. Yes, we're still crew aboard your vessel. We knew the risks. Voren's crest flushed a mottled gray. Plan this. The entire engagement, your ship, your crew, it was a delivery mechanism. Halyard didn't bother denying it. The swarm doesn't respect boundaries. They don't negotiate. They consume. The only way to stop them is to destroy their ability to coordinate. That required a decoy capable of drawing their attention while the strike package got into position. The Vindicator was the decoy. The reactor was the package. My crew volunteered for the mission knowing that survival was a secondary objective. Silence from the Ascendancy ship stretched long enough that Halyard checked the channel to make sure it hadn't failed. Then Voren said, very quietly, "How many of your people died to make this work?" 42 confirmed. "We're still counting. 42 lives. And you are at peace with this." Halyard closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about her daughter. She thought about the colony where the insects had come out of the ground and taken everything. She thought about the faces of her crew when she had told them what the mission would cost, and the way every single one of them had nodded without flinching. "I am not at peace," she said. "I am functional. There is a difference." Ascendancy rescue shuttles arrived within the hour. They found 19 survivors aboard the Vindicator, along with 28 bodies. The medical teams worked in stunned silence, treating wounds that would have killed a Cathari outright and marveling at the human's ability to remain conscious through levels of trauma that should have triggered shock. Halyard walked off her dying ship under her own power, her broken arm splinted with a piece of torn conduit, and her eyes burning with something that made the alien medic step back. Voren met her in the hangar bay of his flagship. Up close, the human was smaller than he'd expected. Smaller and more damaged. The burn scar across her face was old, but the fresh cuts and the way she held her arm made his own pain receptors ache in sympathy. "Your ship is lost," he said. "Your mission should be over." "The mission," Halyard replied, "was never about the ship. The swarm's queen is still alive. The Nexus was a node, not the source. The psychic pulse we detected before the supercarrier's arrival, it was a distress call. The Queen knows we're here now, and she's consolidating her remaining forces in a core system approximately 72 light-years from this position." Voren felt his crest go cold. "That core system is called the Nursery. It is the origin point of the swarm. No fleet has ever entered that region and returned." "I know." Halyard pulled a data crystal from her suit pocket. She must have grabbed it before evacuating the ship, Voren realized, because she was still bleeding into her suit, and yet she had prioritized the intel. "We brought something with us. A bioweapon. engineered specifically for the swarm's genetic signature. It's a virus that hijacks their hive mind linkage and rewrites their instinctive behaviors. When deployed in proximity to the queen, it will propagate through the entire swarm within hours. A bioweapon. Jekyll had joined them, and his voice was thick with revulsion. You're talking about extermination, talking about ending a war that has killed billions of your people across 43 cycles. The swarm doesn't stop. They don't retreat. They don't surrender. They consume until there is nothing left to consume, and then they move on. Your fleet has been buying time. We are offering a solution. Stared at the data crystal. You want us to take you into the nursery. I want you to provide escort and orbital support. My remaining crew and I will handle the deployment. With what ship? Yours is destroyed. Halyard looked at him with those hollow, burning eyes. You have ships. I need one of them to get close enough to the Queen to release the weapon. After that, it doesn't matter what happens to the ship. Vorin understood then, with the clarity of a blade sliding between his ribs, that the human captain had never expected to survive any part of this mission. Not the initial engagement, not the reactor gambit, and certainly not the final strike into the heart of the enemy. You are asking me to take my fleet into certain death, he said. Halyard corrected. I'm asking you to take your fleet into the only fight that matters, the one that ends it. Vorin turned away. He walked to the viewport and stared at the debris field where the Vindicator had made its last stand. The wreckage glittered in the distant starlight, a monument to a kind of warfare the Ascendancy had no doctrine for. He thought about 43 cycles. He thought about the faces of officers he had buried. He thought about the colonies that had gone dark, one after another, as the swarm advanced. I will take this to the Conclave, he said, but I make no promises. Halyard nodded. Then I'll use the time to prepare my people. We'll need access to your medical facilities, and a ship with a fast launch bay. Still bleeding, Vorin noted. Halyard glanced down at her suit as if she'd forgotten. I'll heal, or I won't. Either way, the mission continues. She turned and walked toward the medics, and Vorin watched her go with the sinking realization that whatever the Conclave decided, this human had already made her choice. She was going to the nursery, alone if necessary, and something told him she would find a way to succeed. The Cathari High Conclave convened in emergency session, holographic representatives filling the grand chamber with flickering forms. Vorin stood at the center of the floor and delivered his report without ornamentation. He described the human ship's arrival, its impossible maneuvers, its deliberate self-destruction as a tactical gambit. He described Captain Halyard's bioweapon and her demand for escort into swarm space. He described the 42 human dead and the 19 who remained functional. The debate lasted 7 hours. Conclave Speaker Thalurin, an elder whose crest had faded to the translucent white of advanced age, summarized the opposition's position with merciless precision. You are asking this body to commit the 12th array, our last strategic reserve, to a suicide run based on the word of a species we have known for less than a cycle. A species that fights without elegance, that treats its own vessels as expendable ammunition, and whose captain has already demonstrated a willingness to sacrifice her own people without apparent emotional response. This is not an ally, Fleet Master. This is a predator. She is not without emotion, Vorin said. I spoke with her. She is simply post-emotion. Whatever capacity she had for grief and fear has been burned away by whatever her species has endured. That is supposed to comfort us. It is supposed to inform us. Vorin straightened. The swarm will consume the Ascendancy. Not in a century, not in 10 cycles, within 3 at current attrition rates. We have tried elegance. We have tried precision. We have tried every beautiful, honorable tactic our civilization has produced, and we are losing. The humans are offering us a weapon that works. I'm not asking this conclave to trust them. I am asking you to recognize that we are out of options. The vote passed by a margin of 3 representatives. Vorin was authorized to take a strike force of 12 vessels into the nursery, with full authority to engage at his discretion. The High Conclave's final message was terse. Succeed, or do not return. Halyard met him in the flagship's briefing room. Her broken arm had been set in a Cathari medical cast, and the bleeding had stopped, but she moved with the stiffness of someone running on chemical stimulants and sheer refusal to collapse. Lieutenant Myra Okonkwo stood at her shoulder, a young woman with her brother's face, the brother who had been one of the 42 dead. "You got your escort," Voren said. 12 ships, it's not enough. It will have to be." Halyard activated a holographic display, pulling up the nursery system's layout. The data was sparse. Decades of reconnaissance probes had returned only fragments before being destroyed. "The Queen is located here on the 4th planet. It's a hive world, atmosphere thick with organic particulate. We'll need to breach the upper atmosphere to deploy the weapon effectively." "The weapon itself?" Jekyll asked. "What exactly are we carrying?" Mira Okonkwo answered, her voice steady despite the grief etched into her features. "The virus is a 2-stage organism. Stage 1 infiltrates the swarm's nervous system through the hive-mind linkage. It's asymptomatic for approximately 16 hours, long enough to spread through the entire population. Stage 2 activates when it encounters a specific enzyme produced only by the Queen's endocrine system." When Stage 2 activates, Halyard's expression didn't change. "It rewrites the swarm's recognition protocols. They stop seeing each other as hive mates. They start seeing each other as threats. The drones will attack anything that moves, including each other. The Queen will be perceived as an intruder by her own offspring. The entire species will tear itself apart within 48 hours." The briefing room fell into a dense quiet. Jekyll's crest had flattened so completely it was nearly invisible against his skull. "That is not war. That is genocide." Halyard turned to face him. "Yes, and you can deploy this without hesitation. I can deploy it because if I don't, the swarm will kill your species. And then they will find my species, and then the war will come to Earth. I would rather fight that war here with a weapon that ends it quickly than wait for it to reach my home and kill everyone I have left." She paused. "Hesitation is a luxury for people who have other options. I don't have other options. Neither do you." The strike force departed the Ascendancy Fleet anchorage within the hour. Voren commanded from his flagship, the Spear of Dusk, with Halyard and her surviving crew aboard. The journey to the nursery took 3 days at maximum FTL, and during those 3 days the human crew did something the Cathari found deeply unsettling. They slept. Not the light, semi-aware rest the Ascendancy practiced during combat deployments. Full, deep unconsciousness. Halyard slept for 16 hours straight, her body finally succumbing to the accumulated trauma and exhaustion she had been suppressing through pure will. Myra Okonkwo and the others followed her lead, cycling through rest periods with the mechanical discipline of people who had learned to grab sleep whenever the opportunity presented itself. "How can they trust unconsciousness like that?" Jekyll asked, watching the human quarters through the monitoring feed. "They're completely vulnerable." "They're refueling," Voren said. "They don't see it as vulnerability. They see it as maintenance. Everything about them is maintenance. They treat their bodies like machines. Their emotions like obstacles. What kind of world produces creatures like this?" Voren didn't have an answer. He suspected he didn't want one. On the 4th day, the strike force dropped out of FTL at the edge of the nursery system, and the swarm was waiting for them. The nursery system was a nightmare-given form. The star at its center was a bloated red giant, its light staining the surrounding space in shades of dried blood. Every planet, every moon, every asteroid had been colonized by the swarm. Organic structures grew from planetary crusts like cancerous blooms, and the space between worlds was thick with bioships, thousands of them, tens of thousands, more than any Ascendancy reconnaissance had ever suggested existed. "Defensive formation," Voren ordered. "Overlapping shields. No ship breaks formation without my command." The 12 Cathari vessels tightened into a geometric arrowhead, energy shields meshing into a single protective field. It was a beautiful, elegant defensive posture that had held against swarm assaults 100 times before. It lasted 18 minutes. The swarm came at them from every direction, bioplasma and organic torpedoes saturating the shield harmonics until the generators began to overheat. Voren's tactical display lit up with damage reports. 2 ships lost their port shields. A third suffered a direct hit to its engine housing. The arrowhead formation began to fragment and with it the interlocking shield pattern. "We can't hold this position," Jekyll said. "We need to fall back." Negative. Halyard's voice cut across the command channel. "We're committed. Get us to the fourth planet. That's all you have to do. With 12 ships against a swarm of this magnitude, you don't have to destroy them all, just keep them busy." Vorin redirected power to the forward shields and ordered the formation to push deeper. The Cathari fleet drove forward, energy lances blazing, carving a corridor through the swarm's outer layers. Ship after ship took damage. One of the escorts, the Radiant Vigil, suffered a catastrophic reactor breach and detonated, taking 6 swarm cruisers with it. Vorin logged the loss in the back of his mind and kept moving. The fourth planet swelled in the forward view screen, a bloated sphere of gray-green organic matter wrapped in a haze of spores. The Queen was down there, somewhere beneath layers of living architecture and billions of drones. Getting close enough to deploy the virus would require entering the atmosphere, and entering the atmosphere would mean leaving the protective coverage of the fleet. "We need a delivery vehicle," Myra Okonkwo said. "Something fast enough to punch through atmospheric defenses and release the canister over the Queen's primary hive structure." Halyard had already identified the ship. "The Sorrow's End has a fast launch bay. It was designed for planetary assault drops." Sorrow's End was a Cathari frigate, small and agile. Its captain, a young officer named Thalvarin, volunteered before Vorin could even ask. "My crew is ready, Fleet Master. We'll get them down." The transfer took 7 minutes. 7 minutes of brutal close-quarters combat while the swarm threw everything it had at the Ascendancy fleet. Halyard, Myra, and 3 other human survivors crossed to the Sorrow's End through a pressurized docking tube while plasma fire rattled against the shields. They carried the bioweapon canister between them, a cylinder no larger than a human torso, filled with engineered viral particles suspended in a cryogenic medium. The Sorrow's End broke formation and dove toward the planet. Swarm atmospheric defense organisms rose to meet them, bloated creatures that fired organic projectiles and extruded tendrils designed to snare incoming ships. Thalvarin's piloting was brilliant. He threaded the frigate through gaps Vorin would have sworn were too narrow, using the planet's own gravity well to slingshot past concentrations of defenders. 2 minutes to deployment altitude, Thalvarin reported. The ship shook as a tendril caught the aft engine housing. Damage alarms howled. The port stabilizer failed, and the frigate began to tumble. Myra Okonkwo was already moving. She grabbed the canister and headed for the launch bay, ignoring Halyard's shouted order to wait for backup. The launch bay doors were jammed. The tendril had warped the frame, and the manual release mechanism was located outside the pressurized compartment. Myra sealed her suit, cycled through the emergency airlock, and climbed out onto the hull. The swarm's atmosphere was thick with spores, reducing visibility to meters. Wind sheared at her, buffeting her body against the hull as she hand-over-handed her way toward the launch bay doors. Behind her, the Sorrow's End's remaining engines struggled to maintain altitude. Ahead of her, the primary hive structure was visible through the haze, a mountain of organic matter pulsing with the Queen's presence. Myra reached the manual release, pulled it, and the launch bay doors cracked open. She shoved the canister into the launch tube and hit the activation sequence. The canister shot downward, vanishing into the spore clouds. A tendril caught Myra across the chest and crushed her against the hull. Her suit breached. Her body went limp. She was dead before the Sorrow's End's automated systems could even register the loss. Halyard, watching through the internal monitors, did not cry out. She did not close her eyes. She noted the time of death, logged it, and turned to Thalvarin. "Get us back to the fleet." The Sorrow's End climbed, engines screaming, while below them the virus began to spread. The swarm did not react immediately. Stage 1 of the infection was designed to be silent, undetectable, propagating through the hive mind's own communication, pathways faster than any immune response could track. For 16 hours, nothing would happen. The Swarm Queen, however, was not content to wait. She rose from the primary hive structure like a god of the old myths, enormous, armored in segmented plates the size of Cathari cruisers. her multifaceted eyes glowing with a malevolent intelligence that had guided the swarm across 100 star systems. She didn't know what the humans had done, but she knew they had done something, and her fury was a physical force that made the atmosphere itself tremble. The Queen directed her entire remaining force at the Ascendancy fleet. "She's trying to kill us before the virus can spread," Vorin said, watching the tactical display fill with enemy signatures. "We're surrounded." "Formation," Halyard said. "We just need time." "Much time, 16 hours. Vorin looked at the swarm of contacts closing in on his 11 remaining ships. "We don't have 16 hours, we don't have 6. Then we'll have to make time." Swarm hit them in a wave and the Ascendancy fleet began to die. The battle in the nursery system became a slow-motion execution. Vorin's 11 ships fought with the desperate precision of a civilization that had spent millennia perfecting the art of war. They maneuvered in tight formations, overlapping their failing shields, concentrating fire on the densest clusters of enemies. They killed swarm organisms by the hundreds, then by the thousands. And still the swarm kept coming because the Queen was directing them, and the Queen had decided that this fleet would not leave her system alive. The Spear of Dusk took a direct hit to its command tower. The bridge filled with smoke and the screams of dying officers. Vorin, bleeding from a gash across his crest, refused to leave his post. Jekyll was dead, killed when a console exploded, his body still slumped in his chair. Vorin had no time to grieve. He redirected power from the failing shields to the weapons array and kept firing. Hour after hour, the fleet shrank. 6 ships. 4 ships. 2. Halyard stood on the Spear of Dusk's secondary bridge, watching the tactical display with hollow eyes. Her remaining 3 crew members had been folded into damage control teams, and they worked alongside the Cathari crew with the silent efficiency of people who had already accepted death and were simply waiting for it to arrive. She watched the countdown timer she had set the moment the canister deployed. 11 hours remaining. The fleet would be gone long before then. "Fleet Master." She opened a channel to Vorin. "We're not going to survive the full gestation period. The Queen is too focused on us. She's holding her forces in system instead of dispersing them, which means the virus is spreading through a concentrated population. That's good, that's what we want. But it also means she'll kill us before Stage 2 activates." "I am aware of our tactical situation, Captain." "Then you know there's one more thing we can do." Vorin turned to look at her through the smoke. His 4 eyes were rimmed with exhaustion. "What are you proposing?" "The Queen is directing the assault. She's the linchpin. If we can disrupt her, even briefly, the swarm's coordination will falter. Give me a shuttle and a nuclear payload. I'll make a run at her. You'll be killed before you get within range. Probably, but she'll focus on me. Pull ships away from the fleet to intercept. It might buy you another hour or 2, stared at her. You would sacrifice yourself for 2 hours. I would sacrifice myself for 2 minutes if it meant the virus had a chance to finish its work. Halyard's voice was utterly level. This was always a one-way mission, Fleet Master. Every person on the Vindicator knew that. Myra knew it. The 42 we lost knew it. I'm not special. I'm just the last one left who can still do something useful. Vorin could respond. The tactical board screamed in alert. The Queen was convulsing. It began as a tremor, a ripple passing through her enormous body that made the spore clouds swirl in confused spirals. Then the convulsions intensified. Her multifaceted eyes flickered, the glow behind them stuttering like a failing power grid. She opened her mouth, a cavern lined with teeth the size of Cathari frigates, and let out a scream that was not sound but raw psychic force, blasting through the hive mind with enough power to make every organic structure on the planet's surface ripple. The swarm's assault on the Ascendancy fleet stopped, not paused, not hesitated. Stopped as if someone had thrown a switch. Every bioship in the system went still, drifting on momentum. The Queen screamed again, and this time her own body began to turn against her. The segmented armor plates on her flank split open, not from external damage but from the creatures inside her, her own offspring, now perceiving her as a foreign organism eating their way out. Stage 2, Halyard breathed. It's activating. 16-hour gestation period was supposed to be absolute, but the Queen's immune system, aggressive and hyperadaptive, had attacked the virus the moment it entered her body. That attack had triggered the enzyme release prematurely. Stage 2 had come early, not in 16 hours but in 11, and it was burning through the swarm like wildfire. The drones turned on each other. The cruisers began firing bioplasma at their own hive carriers. The organic structures on the fourth planet's surface began to consume themselves, collapsing into heaps of liquefied tissue. The Queen, vast and terrible, was being eaten alive from the inside by her own brood. Vorin watched in horrified silence. This was not a battle. This was not even a massacre. This was extinction playing out in real time, and it was happening because one human captain had refused to accept that the swarm could not be stopped. "You did this," Vorin said. His voice was not accusatory. It was empty, the voice of someone trying to process something too large for his mind to hold. "Yes," Halyard said. "I did. The Queen, her entire species, will be dead within 48 hours. The virus is self-limiting. Once the host population collapses, it degrades into inert proteins. There won't be any risk of cross-species contamination. The swarm will be gone and the galaxy will be safer for it." She paused. "You called us to help you win a war. This is how we win them." Vorin turned away from the view screen. He couldn't watch anymore. The sounds alone, the psychic death screams of a billion organisms filtering through the ship's sensors, were enough to make his crest press flat against his skull in a posture of pure distress. "Get us out of the system," he ordered. "All surviving ships, emergency FTL, we're leaving." The two remaining Ascendancy vessels, the Spear of Dusk and a single battered destroyer, engaged their drives and fled the nursery. Behind them, the swarm died in silence, tearing itself apart beneath a bloated red sun. Halyard did not look back. The journey home took 6 days. Halyard spent most of it in the medical bay, recovering from injuries she had ignored for too long. The Cathari doctors treated her with a mixture of awe and unease, the way one might handle a tool that had proven supremely effective but was clearly dangerous to hold. Vorin visited her once, standing in the doorway of the medical bay with his crest still flattened. "The Conclave will want to debrief you," he said. "They will have questions." "Sure they will. Will you tell them?" Halyard considered the question. "The truth, the swarm is gone, your war is over, my mission is complete." "The cost," she met his gaze. "The cost was always going to be paid. The only question was who would pay it. Your people have been paying for 43 cycles. My people paid with a single ship and 44 lives. I consider that an acceptable exchange." Vorin had no response to that. He left, and Halyard closed her eyes, and for the first time in longer than she could remember. She allowed herself to feel the weight of everything she had done. It did not crush her. It simply sat on her chest, heavy and cold, and she breathed around it the way she had learned to breathe around every loss. 1 month after the swarm's extinction, Fleet Master Vorin received a message. He was alone in his quarters aboard the Spear of Dusk, still overseeing the slow process of fleet reconstruction. The Cathari Ascendancy was celebrating across 1,000 worlds, the end of the swarm, the salvation of civilization, the dawn of a new era. Vorin had attended the ceremonies, accepted the honors, and felt nothing but a hollow ache in his chest. The message arrived on a secure channel with a human encryption key. It was from Captain Tessa Halyard, and it contained no text, only a set of spatial coordinates and a brief audio file. "Fleet Master Vorin. Before my transport returns to human space, I want you to see something. Come alone." Should have ignored it. He had duties. He had a fleet to rebuild, subordinates to promote, the endless administrative machinery of a post-war military to maintain. But he requisitioned a courier vessel and set course for the coordinates, because he knew that whatever Halyard wanted him to see, it would not let him rest until he had seen it. The coordinates led him to an uninhabited system at the edge of what the galactic maps now labeled as human territory. No planets of note, no resource deposits worth exploiting. Just a star, a scattering of asteroids, and Vorin's breath stopped. The graveyard stretched across 30,000 kilometers of empty space. Hulls upon hulls, thousands of them, so densely packed that the courier's navigation computer had to plot a careful path to avoid collisions. They were human ships, or what remained of them. Warships of every size and configuration, from small corvettes to massive dreadnoughts larger than anything the Ascendancy had ever built. They were torn open, burned, shattered. Some had been split in half by weapons of incredible power. Others were riddled with holes that suggested sustained bombardment over hours or days. A few were so thoroughly destroyed that only their engine housings remained, drifting in slow spirals. Halyard's transport was waiting at the edge of the field. Voren docked and found her standing at a viewport, her arm still in its medical cast, her burned scar pale in the dim light. "What is this place?" he asked. "The Karen Field." Halyard didn't turn around. "It's where we put the wrecks from the intercolonial war. 500 years ago, humanity fought itself. Not a skirmish, not a border dispute, a real war, total war. Every colony, every nation, every faction throwing everything they had at each other for 37 years. Voren looked at the drifting graveyard and his mind struggled to process the numbers. How many died? Final estimates are around 2 billion. We're not sure. Record-keeping wasn't a priority during the worst of it. She finally turned to face him. "The ships you see here are only the ones we could recover. There are battlefields across 60 star systems where the debris is still too dense to navigate. We call them the Iron Reefs. Why are you showing me? I want you to understand something." Halyard's voice was quiet, but it carried the same weight Voren had heard when she gave orders on the bridge of the Vindicator. "You think we're monsters. You think we're predators who know nothing but destruction. And you're not wrong, but we didn't become this way by choice. We became this way by doing this to ourselves, for 37 years without mercy, without restraint. We learned war by fighting the only enemy that was ever truly our equal, ourselves." Voren's crest had flattened so completely it was barely visible. "And after this war, you became what you are now. We became the people who would do anything to make sure it never happened again. Not to us, not to anyone who couldn't stop it on their own." She gestured at the field. "The swarm wasn't a war to us. It was a prevention. We looked at what they were, what they would become if they kept expanding, and we saw a future that looked too much like our past. So we stopped it, with genocide, with whatever it took." Halyard met his eyes, and for the first time Voren saw something beneath the flatness. Not regret exactly, but a deep, bone-weary acknowledgement of what she was. "I'm not asking you to forgive us. I'm not asking you to trust us. I'm telling you the truth so you can make informed decisions about how the Ascendancy deals with humanity going forward." A second ship emerged from FTL at the edge of the system, a human diplomatic vessel, unarmed and unescorted. It docked with the transport, and an old man in civilian clothes walked across the connecting tube to join them. He was thin, gray-haired, with the same hollow-eyed look Voren had come to recognize as the mark of someone who had survived things they would never speak about. "Fleet Master Voren," the diplomat said, extending a hand in the human gesture of greeting. "My name is Ambassador Donal Ward. I'm here to offer you a treaty." "A treaty," Voren repeated. "Simple one. Humanity will not seek conflict with the Cathari Ascendancy. We will not claim your territory, interfere with your politics, or impose our laws on your people. In return, we ask the same: non-interference, mutual recognition of borders, a commitment to talk before we shoot." Ward's smile was thin and tired. "We don't want another war. We've had enough of those. If we refuse, then we'll leave and we'll watch and we'll hope you never give us a reason to come back." Ward's voice remained polite, but the words landed like hammer blows. "Captain Halyard wanted you to see this graveyard because she wanted you to understand what we're capable of. I want you to sign this treaty because I want you to understand what we're afraid of. We're afraid of becoming those people again. The treaty is as much a restraint on us as it is on you." Voren looked at the graveyard. He thought about the Vindicator and the reactor gambit, and Myra Okonkwo dying on the hull of a Cathari frigate. He thought about the Queen convulsing as her own children ate her alive. He thought about the 43 cycles of war, the billions of Ascendancy dead, the endless retreat, and the single human ship that had ended it all in a matter of days. He took the offered hand. "I will present the treaty to the Conclave. I will recommend they sign it." Ward nodded. "That's all we can ask." Halyard watched the exchange without speaking. When Ward left to return to his ship, she lingered for a moment at the viewport, her reflection ghostly against the field of wreckage. "What will you do now?" Voren asked. go home, bury my crew, file my after-action reports. She paused. Try to remember how to be something other than what this mission made me. Can you? Human captain, the woman who had thrown her ship into a swarm cluster, watched 44 of her people die, and ordered the extermination of an entire species, looked at him with eyes that were not cold, not hollow, but simply exhausted beyond any metric Vorin could comprehend. I don't know, she said, but I'm going to try. That's what we do. We try. She turned and walked away, and Vorin watched her go, and he understood at last what the Cathari had never truly comprehended about war. They had believed they mastered it. They had refined it into an art form, an elegant dance of precise formations and honorable engagements. They had turned battle into a science and strategy into a philosophy. They had done everything right, and they had still been losing, because the swarm didn't care about elegance or honor or art. The humans had not mastered war. They had simply survived it, again and again, against themselves, against the universe, against enemies that had no concept of mercy. They had survived by burning away everything that was not essential, by sacrificing ships, crews, and pieces of their own souls, by looking at the worst possible outcome and planning for it anyway. War had no masters. There were only survivors, and humanity had survived more darkness than any species should ever know. Vorin returned to his ship and set course for home, carrying the treaty in his databanks and a weight in his chest that he suspected would never fully lift. Behind him, the Karen field drifted in eternal silence, a warning written in steel and sacrifice, left by a species that had learned the hard way that the only way to end a war was to be willing to pay its full cost. And somewhere in the distance, the last echoes of the swarm's death scream faded into the void, marking the end of one nightmare and the quiet, uneasy beginning of another.